The 7x57 Mauser. Legendary. You may say the first of all the modern cartridges. You might say the father, grandfather, great-grandfather of many of our cartridges that we love here. 30-06, 270, 308, 243. And I think I've been remiss in not really discussing some of these European cartridges. So I want to tackle that. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, ballistics, cartridges, the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host, military law enforcement, private security contracting, hunting, background, bio bullet points in the show notes. God has blessed me to do all that, and I hope to use that opportunity and blessing to pass information on to you. With that, forgive me if I've been remiss, because I just assume, probably wrongly, that most of you guys that are into guns are really into history, which would lead you into military cartridges or even historic hunting cartridges. But I don't know if that's the case, because I recently did a poll on my Patreon page. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes if you want to go back and find it. I recently did a poll on, what's your favorite European cartridge? And I listed a bunch of them. To me, really popular European cartridges. And a lot of the responses were, I don't know anything about any of these cartridges, or maybe I heard about one of them. Really? This is not... If I was polling outside of Walmart, maybe I would expect that answer. But this is gunfighter life. I assume you guys that listen to this are into guns, which, again, I wrongly assumed meant that you were history nerds also, and military history and hunting history nerds, depending on, what circle of that Venn diagram you most fit into. But I guess that's not the case. So let me take you back to the late 1800s and a juggernaut in firearms development, Mauser. The Mauser rifles and the Mauser cartridges. These shape a lot of our modern cartridges even today. This came at a time when we were making leaps and bounds in firearms and cartridge technology. I'm not talking about today, where it's you've had the 7 Rem Mag for 50 years and now you get the 7 PRC, which is in some ways better, in some ways not as good, I would argue. But I'm talking about a giant leap forward, in a matter of years. Smokeless powder, Spitzer bullets, rimless cartridges, high-pressure steels that could handle much higher pressures than the older black powder that was required for the modern smokeless powder. All these things were converging. Now, it's hard to find out, I don't take Wikipedia as gospel. It's hard to pin down which one of these came first, the 8x57 or the 7x57. I do believe, and you do a deep dive into this, but I think that whichever one was developed first, which is kind of shady, the first one to get adopted was the 7x57 Mauser. This is a completely modern cartridge, and it was developed in 1892. The Germans were way ahead of their time here, both in the rifle, which is legendary in its own right, and in the cartridge, which is the focus of today's episode, the 7x57 Mauser. The initial loads, I don't know that they were Spitzer bullets, but it quickly went to a Spitzer bullet. It's high pressure, especially for the time. Smokeless powder, rimless cartridge, so it could be stacked in a magazine, like an internal magazine in a rifle or a stripper clip, or even later a detachable box magazine. It's been adopted by many countries, and here's where I say it's the father, great-grandfather, somewhere in that lineage, uncle, kissing cousin. It's kin to a lot of our American cartridges that we have today, if I want to personify a cartridge that way, right? But the military history goes that Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders and the rest of our military forces, right, went to fight the Spanish in Cuba. And we were armed with 4570 trapdoors and the 3040 Krag. Well, we won those battles, Battle of, Kettle Hill, Saffron Hill, whatever they were. But Teddy, being a gun guy, wouldn't it be nice to have a gun guy president, a hunting president, outdoorsman president again? But anyway, he was a gun guy. And even though they won those battles, we kind of got our rear ends handed to us ballistically because we were facing off the Spanish, which had adopted the German 7x57 Mauser. And that was leaps and bounds ahead of our cartridges. Yeah, yes, way, way ahead of the 4570 government. Right? I know people love that cartridge and they want to believe it's some super weapon, but it was obsolete for us in the 1890s. In 1892, when the 7x57 Mauser was developed and adopted in 1893, it was already obsolete. We had already moved away from a 3040 Krag, and the 7x57 spanks that. If you still want to hunt with one, fine. If you still want to pretend you're hunting dinosaurs on a movie, or you just want to limit yourself to a straight-walled cartridge, or you just love the 4570, you want to hunt with, cast lead bullets or whatever, that's fine. But realize that you are limiting yourself. If you want to do that, hats off to you. But the point is the 7x57 Mauser, even then, was leaps and bounds ahead of what we had. And Teddy Roosevelt and many others, I assume, realized that, and they said, we got to get some of this. And we copied, yes, we, America, we copied the German technology. Not just the rifle, the Mauser rifle, which we adopted into the 1903 Springfield, but also the cartridge, which would become the 3003 and then the 3006 Springfield. Yes, we copied it. We copied it so much that we got sued by Germany and lost, I do believe. And we were told to pay them royalties, but we soon went to war with them and told them to shove it. But we copied it, right? We copied that technology because it was way better than what we had. That cartridge that started that was the 7x57 Mauser. We, not loving the metric system here, we went with a 30 caliber, right, kind of in between the 7 and the 8 millimeter Mauser, which is outside today's discussion, but kind of right in between. Right, we split the difference. We made a 30 caliber, and since we already had a 30-40 Krag, that kind of makes sense, right? So we copied it, .308 diameter bullets, and we kind of made our own Mauser cartridge. And since we're not disgusting metrists, whatever, I just made up a word, people that use the metric system, which makes me want to vomit. The French Revolution was garbage, which is what that came out of, and the whole science as a religion thing is garbage too. But anyway, we decided to put some real measurements to it, calibers, inches, .308 diameter bullet, and instead of doing X for the case length like the Germans, that's what it means, right? 7 millimeters by 57 is the length of the case. We made the 3003, and then quickly after that, the 3006. The major difference being the pointed bullet in the 3006. So we got a pretty good copy of that. And we copied the rifle too and put it in a controlled round feed Mauser type action, which would become the 1903 Springfield, which would turn into many of our beloved sporting rifles like the Winchester Model 70 Pre-64, etc. And then, obviously, we developed the 308 off the 30-06. We developed the 270 off the 30-06. We developed, the 243 off the 308. And we developed, we shortened the 308 to the 30 Thompson Center, which quickly died. But then we got the 6.5 Creedmoor. So This cartridge, again, I would call it maybe the first modern cartridge, either this one or the 8x57. But as far as we're concerned here in America, this one had a far larger impact because we encountered it fighting the Spanish. And I should digress a bit and say we're America now, and Spain empire kind of collapsed, and they're again being conquered by Muslims right now, largely because they just invited them in. They thought, they've been trying to kill us for 1,200 years, let's invite them in, and maybe they won't do it this time. Well, they are again. So anyway, the point is, at this time, Spain was still like a major world power. America at this time was still a fairly new country, right? We had a lot of potential, which by God's grace, we became a major world, empire, a major world player on the world stage, but we weren't at the time. And Spain had been a major world player for a long time. So the Spanish military was legit, is what I'm trying to get at when we encountered them. They had the money and the backing to get some fine military equipment, which at the time was German, which a lot of times today still is German, right? So that was kind of the stage that this was set in, which we developed the 30-06 off of. Now, there's a lot more to that story, but that's a brief overview of the 7x57 Mauser. Now, some notable hunting history. This cartridge has been used all over the world. It has some notable uses, a lot more than I can remember, but one of the notable ones was Karamojo Bell, an ivory hunter who shot a lot of elephants. And a lot of people think that he only shot them with the 7x57 Mauser. I don't believe that's true. He shot them with many cartridges, but he killed a lot of elephants with the 7x57 Mauser. A lot of pachyderms went into the dirt, I'm sure by other people too, but notably by Karamojo Bell with the 7x57 Mauser for some hunting prowess. A lot of famous hunters have used and do use the 7x57 Mauser still today. To give credit where it's due, I'm going to go to Wikipedia and I'm going to cite some stuff on there. So let's look at that here to give you some background. We already went through the history and when it was developed and adopted, assuming, again, I don't take Wikipedia as gospel, but it's generally a good thing here. Originally known in Britain as the 257, again, not the metric system, but they call it the 275 Rigby, rather, the 275. You'll see it on some older guns or some newer guns even referred to as the 275 Rigby. Kind of has a little bit more panache, a little bit more riz, as Gen Alpha would call it, right? It hurts me to say that, but then the 7x57 Mauser, but the 275 Rigby. Says popular stalking cartridge, sporting rifles, John Rigby, Holland and Holland. Okay. I'm looking here, used by Austria, Hungary, Spain, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, Kingdom of Serbia, Venezuela, First Philippine Republic, and the Boers. Designer Paul Mauser, designed 1892, produced 1892 to present, right? I'm going to interject here, this is not from Wikipedia, but there are still a lot of rifles and loads available in 7x57 Mauser. It's a worldwide cartridge, more popular in Europe than here. If you're a European listener, you probably know all about the 7x57. It's probably a staple cartridge. It's not here in America, but it's not obscure either. I went on Midway USA. I'm not sponsored by Midway USA. I'm certainly not sponsored by Wikipedia. I just try and give credit where it's due. That's generally where I go to shop for a lot of stuff. So I went on, and I think there was 13 loads listed, modern loads listed, factory loads, which is not nothing, right? It's not 308 here in America, but it's not nothing. It's not like super rare. So it's still available. And there's rifles still being chambered in it. You can obviously get a lot of older rifles chambered in it, a lot of old Mausers, but you can also get brand new rifles chambered in the cartridge. So it's still very much viable. Okay, let's talk a little bit about ballistics here. I'm going to go back to Wikipedia now. This lists 123 grain bullet at 3,200 feet per second. Or I'm sorry, with 3,200 foot-pounds. It gives me meters per second. I hate metric. It lists 123 grain bullet at 2953. It lists RWS load of 162 grain at 2625. And it lists a military load, 173 grain at 2297. Now, obviously the older original military loads are a little bit weaker than modern loads. Although the original was smokeless powder, our powders have come a ways since then, and we have upped the pressure a bit. Not a ton, but a bit since 1892. With that said, here in America, we have what's called SAMI. Now, I don't want to dunk on SAMI, Sports Ammunition Arms Manufacturing Institute or something. I don't know what it stands for, but it's the governing body. It's the HOA, Homeowners Association of Cartridge Loading, right? They tell pretty much the major manufacturers, for liability reasons, what they can and can't load to here in America, right? Europe or other places in the world are not governed by SAMI. But here in America, they're kind of the authority on what you can load to. And they are very, very pedestrian, in my opinion, when it comes to loading stuff, especially older cartridges. Because they are like, if you took this ammo and put it in the oldest possible gun, right? If you went to, I don't know, somewhere and found an old original 1893 Spanish Mauser and put the ammo in it, would the gun blow up? Okay, so they limit it to that. But in most newer rifles, any modern rifle, you should be able to load it to much higher pressures. And some companies do. Some like that RWS load, I can tell by looking at the numbers. Since RWS is a European country, they're not as concerned about it. I don't know if they just have, less litigious society there, but we look at that original military loading, 173 grain at 2297. That's still a full-powered rifle cartridge, right? If we look at the RWS load, we have 162 grain at 2625 feet per second. And we have 123 grain at 2953. That's a fully modern, full-powered, right? We're not talking intermediate. We're not talking 7.62 by 39. We're not talking, 5.56. Those are intermediate cartridges, and they're fine for intermediate cartridges. This is a full-powered rifle cartridge. If we think about that in terms of the 308, like the de facto full-powered rifle cartridge, the most common one I can think of, I know it's rough numbers, right? I like to remember stuff in rough numbers. I got a lot of ballistic stuff floating around in my head. But rough numbers is 150 grain at 2,800, right? You can get some hotter loads than that, but that's a general pedestrian load, 150 at 2,800. This lists 162 grain at 2625 and 123 at 2950. So ballistically, anything you can do with a 308, you can do with a 7x57 Mauser. Okay? It's obviously 7 millimeter instead of 7.62, right, which is slightly larger. But similar bullet weights, right, we have here from 123 to 173. Those are pretty common bullet weights even in 308. Now generally for the same weight bullet, it's going to be a little bit more higher sectional density because it's going to be slightly longer for the same bullet weight because it's a smaller caliber, right? That's how that works. But you're really splitting hairs. It's a fully modern cartridge. One thing I will point out is that I told you about the development and we adopted the 30-06. Well, that became the standard for our military through both world wars. So that's what we call in America the standard action length. That cartridge is longer than a 7x57 Mauser. When we decided we wanted to shorten that and make it more efficient because, again, powder technology evolved a bit and we could, get the same performance out of a smaller cartridge, we went to the 308. Now, I know that 308 does not equal a 30-06, but I'm saying when we wanted to duplicate the original military load for the 30-06, we could do it in a shorter cartridge, which we did with the 308. So that became the short action. So a short action is based on a 308. A 7x57 Mauser, which predates both of those by a lot, it's not either one of those. It's in between. So that being said, in America, a lot of our actions are going to be a little bit too long, which is not a big deal, or they're too short to fit the 7x57 Mauser. So, a lot of times, these will be chambered at a long action. Not a big deal, I just wanted to point it out. This would be like an in-between action, like a medium action, an original Mauser action, right? 7x57 Mauser. So, they're going to be a little bit, in between a 308 length action and a 30-06 length action. Not a big deal. So, there's that. Also, if you hand load, I'm not going to give you any data. I'm not telling you to do anything to blow your gun up, right? If you blow your fingers off, it's your fault, not my fault. But you can find, like, modern load data for modern strong actions. And by modern, I mean, like, middle of the 20th century and forward. But something like a Ruger No. 1 single shot, or, well, let's say a Ruger Hawkeye or Ruger M77. Those are rifles that have been chambered in 7x57 Mauser. They will handle a lot more pressure than an 1892 Spanish Mauser will, right? So if you hand load in America, or you can get your hands on some European loads, you're really not handicapped that much. And it being a fully modern cartridge and 7mm, right? We have a lot of 7mm cartridges here today that are very popular. 7mm Rem Mag, the 280 Ackley Improved, which I was blessed to be shooting yesterday. The 7 WSM, the 7 Rum, the 7 Psalm, there's a bunch, right? We have a bunch of 7mm cartridges, is my point. The closest one that we have to this ballistically, which is, so close, it's like anything one can do, the other can do, loaded to its potential, and you may even get a little bit more out of the 7x57 Mauser, but it's close, is the 7mm 08, which is a 308 neck down to 7mm. Now here in America, this one is the more logical choice if you're just going by logic, because 308 is super popular. And all you have to do to make 7mm 08 brass is neck it down. So that's easy. Load data is easy. A lot of the other stuff's going to be easier. Standard short action will fit it, so you don't have any wasted space there. But 7mm 08 is a fantastic all-around hunting cartridge. The 7x57 Mauser, predates that by a long time. So anything that will do, this will do. And I would say hunting-wise, it's anything you would do with a 308, you can certainly do with a 7x57 Mauser, and likely has been done successfully by a 7x57 Mauser. I talked about there's modern loads available. There's a Remington Core Lock for the 7x57 Mauser. That's about as common as you get for good quality hunting ammo. So with that, that is a very, very brief overview of the 7x57 Mauser. Something we owe, probably a bit more remembrance of, considering how much it affects our modern cartridges. Now, I consider myself a pragmatist when it comes to shooting. By God's grace, I provide my way and, put food on the table as a professional gunfighter, and have for most of my adult life. I'm still currently a private security contractor. I see guns as tools. I also like to hunt to put meat on the table for my family. I see guns as practical tools. That said, I think it is helpful, and we might understand more about the guns we have today if we look at the history of where our guns come from. And I just thought, most people that run any guns knew that. But judging by the Patreon poll, maybe that's not the case. Anyway, there's a lot of cool stuff on Patreon. And I just put out a vote, which I do pretty often, and I try to remember to make those free. So you don't have to put in a credit card. You don't have to sign up. You can just go and scroll through and find the free posts on my Patreon page, and you can vote on content. I got 9 or 10 things to vote on for upcoming content. So if you want to say in the content, you want to check out Patreon, there's a bunch of stuff that's just not going to be on the podcast that's on Patreon. A lot of that's for the paid members, but not all of it. You can go check it out for free. And of course, if you want to support the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. I refuse sponsors like gun sponsors, ammo sponsors, cheap Chinese optics companies, stuff like that, because I don't want to be taking a bribe and telling you to go buy some cheap Chinese optic because they gave me a free one or because, they're paying me to. I want to be fair and unbiased. If you appreciate that, consider becoming a patron. There's a lot of cool content that's only on there for patrons. I recently did just for fun guns and like calibers for Bigfoot. Just because I thought it would be fun for the patrons as a thank you for all the stuff they do. But there's a ton of Patreon-only content on there. So with that, consider going to Patreon and signing up, or just consider going there and checking it out for free and voting on content. I want to say a thank you to all the people that are patrons. I just took some money out of the Patreon fund, and I bought some ballistics gel. I had you guys vote on that, and you guys said you wanted ballistics gel. You wanted me to get some ballistics gel to see what it's all about. So guess what? I bought some ballistics gel, and a thank you to all the patrons that made that possible. And more than just the money, thank you for just letting me know that you appreciate the podcast enough to support it. That means a lot to me, more than I probably express often, and that's my fault. But I appreciate you guys and everybody that has done anything to support the podcast. I really am humbled by that. All right, with that, your tactical tip of the day. That legendary Mauser type action. The iterations of that, the developments of that, the copies of that, especially the pre-64 Winchester Model 70 are like my favorite hunting action, period. Control round feed, bolt action, rock solid, as dependable and rugged and reliable as a repeating firearm can be. That said, a lot of those are really expensive. Like an FN Mauser can be quite expensive. They still make a Mauser 98. It's like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get a brand new German Mauser 98. But as I alluded to in reading the countries that use this cartridge, a lot of countries use Mausers. A lot of them here in America probably don't get the respect that they deserve. A lot of those countries that adopted them, even though they lost a war and maybe they're not as coveted as war memorabilia, those actions are still really good. So do your research. I'm not the authority on this, but go find, if you're looking for a value, find a good Mauser that may have even been made in Germany but is stamped with another country. That's a rock solid action. If you are looking for a good Mauser action, either to shoot as is, or for the shooting the history part, or to make into, or to get one that's already been sporterized and remake into a really, really, really good rifle with that old world quality and that legendary rock solid reliability. So that's your tactical tip of the day. A lot of other countries made Mausers and made very good ones, or had them made for them by the Germans, and they're not as coveted as one that stamped German stuff. Your tactical verse of the day. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Who can utter the mighty acts of the Lord? Who can declare all his praise? Blessed are those who keep justice, and he who does righteousness at all times. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.